In 2018, the podcast Astonishing Legends, who usually focus on research, not ghost hunting, decided to test the Sallie House for themselves. They left a Panasonic RR-DR60 recorder in the nursery. It was voice-activated, completely silent until it heard a sound. The team stepped out, left the recorder running, and came back just minutes later. What they captured has been described as one of the most chilling EVPs ever recorded. On live television, this house revealed its darkest secret. In the early 1990s, in a quiet house in Atchison, Kansas, an episode of the popular paranormal TV show Sightings was being filmed. During the filming of the show, the owner of the house, a man named Tony Pickman, began coming under attack. Tony was doubled over in pain, but nobody could see what was causing him so much discomfort. The cameras continued to roll as fresh, bloody wounds began carving themselves into his skin, first across his stomach and then across his forehead. Investigators who were present at the time stood there frozen, mouths agape. They watched in complete shock as invisible claws seemed to tear into Tony's flesh before their very eyes. What happened at that house would go on to earn it a reputation among many paranormal enthusiasts as America's most haunted house. This is the haunting of the Sallie House. Before the Pickmans, before the cameras, before the scratches caught on film, there was another story. It's the mid-1800s. The house at 508 North 2nd Street belongs to Dr. Charles Finney, a respected physician in the town of Atchison, Kansas. His home doubles as his surgery, and one night, long after dark, he's startled awake by frantic pounding at his front door. On the porch stands a woman, pale with panic, clutching her 6-year-old daughter in her arms. The child, a girl called Sallie, as the story goes, is doubled over, clutching her side, shrieking in pain. Dr. Finney doesn't hesitate. He ushers them inside, his wife roused by the commotion, candles lit quickly. The smell of oil and dust fills the hallway as the woman begs him to save her daughter. The doctor examines her quickly and he knows exactly what this is. It's a rupturing appendix, and if he doesn't act now, the girl will die. There's no hospital, no ambulance, and no time to wait. It has to be done here, right now, tonight. He guides them into the basement where his operating table waits. The child is laid out, her mother clutching her hands so tightly her knuckles blanch. The mother whispers prayers through trembling lips. Finney pours the anaesthetic. His hands shake, his heart pounds. In his haste, he misjudges the dosage. The girl should slip away into unconsciousness, but as he makes the first incision, Sallie's eyes shoot wide open. She's awake. Her screams pierce the basement. High, raw, animalistic. The kind of sound that tears a hole into a mother's heart. She thrashes against her mother's grip, but the woman holds on, sobbing, pleading with the doctor to stop. But he can't stop now. To stop is to guarantee death. But to continue is unthinkable. He cuts deeper. Sallie screams louder. Her mother collapses against the table, helpless, powerless to do anything but watch her daughter be torn apart by pain. And then, silence. The child goes limp. Her small hand slides from her mother's grasp. Her chest does not rise again. Dr. Finney steps back, his apron stained, his hands shaking. The mother howls in grief. A young life ended, a child's final memory, not of comfort, but of agony. And if the stories are to be believed, Sallie never left that basement. In the early 1990s, Tony and Debra Pickman felt like their dreams were finally starting to come true as they moved into a modest white house at 508 North 2nd Street, Atchison, Kansas. They were newly married, expecting their first child, and ready to start a really exciting new chapter in their life together as a family. I really do hate to be the bearer of bad news, but what followed would become one of the most well-documented hauntings in American history. Not just because of what they experienced, but because their torment was captured on camera by the TV show Sightings. To this day, investigators still call it the Heartland Ghost. At first it was subtle, flickering lights, ceiling fan chains swaying like invisible fingers were batting at them, their baby waking constantly in the nursery, but sleeping soundly anywhere else. The Pickmans tried to explain it away. Wiring issues, drafts, maybe just the stress of being new parents. But then things crossed the line from inconvenient to impossible. One night, my vacuum's just fallen over on its own. That's really strange. My vacuum's just fallen over on its own, and I haven't touched it all day. Anyway, one night, Tony walked past the nursery. The light was on, and in the centre of the floor, 3 of his son's stuffed animals were sitting upright in a perfect circle. Thinking this was a bit strange, but not much more than that, he picked the stuffed animals up and carried them back to the bookshelf. He then switched the light back off and went back downstairs. Before he even reached the bottom step, a chill ran down his spine as he heard the light click back on by itself. Tony hesitated for a brief moment before gingerly walking back up the stairs to investigate. His breath caught in his throat as he peeked around the doorway into the nursery to see that the bears were back on the floor, each of them facing the doorway as if they were waiting. This time, he called Debra and her sister upstairs to witness it. They'd all been downstairs, so none of them could possibly have touched the bears. At this point, there really was no logical explanation. They picked the bears up, again returned them to the shelf, shut the light off, and went back downstairs. Tony, in particular, was quite shaken at this point. Once again, as the 3 adults reached the bottom of the stairs, they all heard that light click back on by itself. And once again, the toys were back on the floor. Alright, quick question for you watching. If you walked into a nursery and saw toys sitting in a perfect circle on the floor just minutes after you know you've placed them on the shelf, would you pick them back up, or would you grab your child and your keys and get the fuck out? Let me know in the comments, because I definitely know what I'd do. That night, nobody slept in the nursery. The family dog posted guard at the bedroom door, growling and barking at something that none of them could see. And from that moment on, the activity only escalated. Tony began hearing footsteps thundering up and down the staircase at night. At first, he blamed the family cats. Cats? What fucking cats have they got, tigers and lions? But one night, after being kept awake, he crept to the stairs to catch them in the act. The stairwell was completely empty. Then he heard the footsteps charging towards him up the stairs, followed by a freezing wind that rushed straight through his body. But creepiest of all, behind that was the unmistakable laughter of children. Be honest, how many of you have heard footsteps in your house when you knew you were alone? Did you investigate? Or did you pretend you didn't hear it? Or did you do what I did when I was a kid, grab your keys and leave the house? So, by this point, the haunting seemed to be specifically targeting Tony. One afternoon, as Debra sat nearby, Tony shot right up from a nap, locked eyes with her, and in a flat voice whispered, "He's mine," then immediately lay back down. Debra brushed it off as a dream, but the house definitely wasn't finished with Tony. That one line, "He's mine," just gives me chills. What do you think it meant? Do you think Sallie was claiming their baby? Or was it something else claiming Tony himself? Drop your theories in the comments. Family photos hanging in the stairwell were discovered flipped upside down, and one frame was completely shattered. Candles melted where they stood, even ones that had never been lit. One was still wrapped in its plastic casing, yet inside the wax was the impression of a tiny handprint. The wick was untouched. It was as if something had pressed into it with heat, leaving its mark. That was the breaking point. The Pickmans realised they couldn't fight this alone, so they reached out for help. And their story soon drew the attention of a television crew who would become part of the haunting themselves. The show was, of course, called Sightings. At first, the crew arrived sceptical, but what they captured inside 508 North 2nd Street would haunt them too, and keep them coming back again and again. At first, the Pickmans' names were kept secret. Tony especially wanted no one to know it was him, but as the activity escalated and as the cameras captured more and more compelling evidence, their anonymity fell away. The world now knew them as the family inside the Sallie House. The activity inside the Sallie house wasn't limited to toys moving or footsteps in the night. Sometimes the phenomena turned dangerous, and fire was the weapon of choice. They weren't big, roaring fires that threatened to swallow the whole house. No, these were smaller, stranger, almost surgical. Flames would appear suddenly in random places, then vanish just as quickly. Objects weren't consumed the way you'd expect. Instead, the fire seemed to choose very specific areas to attack. One of the most disturbing examples happened during a family party. A doll was found sitting on the stairs on fire. Not engulfed, not reduced to ash. Just certain parts of it burned so precisely it looked like the flame had come from the inside out. Imagine you're hosting a party and some friend finds a doll on your staircase in flames. Would you stay in that house another night? Or is that the moment you pack your bags and fuck off? Other items in the house suffered the same bizarre damage. A candle still wrapped in plastic was found melted and warped, yet its wick had never been lit. Even the sighting's crew witnessed these targeted bursts of flames during their investigations. And the more Tony saw, the more convinced he became that the thing inside the house wasn't just tormenting them, it was experimenting with them. If it could melt candles, what stopped it from setting the crib on fire while the baby slept inside? That very thought haunted Tony more than anything else, because he knew the family who lived there before had also reported sudden, unexplained fires. One memory in particular stood out. The window frame of the nursery itself erupting into flames without warning. Hang on, why would you move into a house where you've heard that the window frame in the baby's nursery has burst into flames on its own? Is that not like the red flag of all red flags? The house didn't just move things, it didn't just scratch, it burned, and no one could explain how or why. For Debra, the answer seemed very simple. The house wasn't angry, it wasn't evil, it was the ghost of a little girl, lonely, frightened, just desperate for some attention. That belief was reinforced when the sightings team brought in psychic Peter James. The cameras rolled as he stopped dead at the foot of the stairs.
There's a little girl that's standing right there. Right at the top of the stairs. Hello? Hello? Look. Hello? Can you speak to me, Sallie? Is that your name, Sallie?
And here's the crazy part. Peter James had never been told the name. So how did he know? Coincidence? Or proof? I'll let you decide. The crew froze. The family froze. Peter had named the entity without ever being told. From that moment forward, the ghost inside the house was no longer it. It was Sallie. Debra felt strangely comforted. A maternal instinct kicked in, as if she could protect this little soul who now seemed to be protecting her baby. Yeah, right. But Tony? He felt something else. Unease. Dread. And it didn't take long before he discovered why. One night, Debra stepped out of the shower to find Tony pale and shaken. "She bit me," he muttered. On his leg was the distinct impression of teeth, and that was just the beginning. The scratches followed. Deep, angry marks raked across his body. Sometimes they burned, sometimes they bled, and sometimes they simply appeared with no sensation at all. Whatever lived in that house had picked its target. And it wasn't Debra or the baby. It was Tony. Okay, let's pause here. Do you think Tony was scratching and biting himself without realising it, like in his sleep? Was he just doing it for attention? Or was something genuinely attacking him? I'd love to hear what you think. One morning, after a long night shift, Tony staggered into the kitchen for a glass of juice. He turned towards the basement door and froze.
I walked over to the kitchen cabinet, opened the cabinet and got out a glass, poured my orange juice. Started to take a drink, and as I turned around, there was a little girl standing not more than 3 foot away from me, just as plain as you are to me now.
Standing there was a little girl. She wore an old-fashioned white dress, the kind a child might wear to church in the last century. Her expression was terrified. She didn't move, she didn't blink. Tony just stared until he realised that he could see straight through her. That snapped him out of his trance. He dropped the glass and bolted upstairs, frantic. Upstairs? Again, I'd be bolting it straight out of that front door. What is wrong with you? Later, Tony sketched her face, and when a former resident of the house saw the drawing, they recognised her immediately.
I lived here about 3 years ago with my 3 children, and we lived here for about 8 months. And the whole time we lived here, my daughter was 5 at the time. She had an imaginary friend named Sallie. I'd scold Heather. I would scold her for something, and she would come back and tell me, I didn't do that, Sallie did it. Or Sallie told me to do it.
But Sallie wasn't the only apparition Tony saw. At times he'd glimpse what looked exactly like Debra passing him in the hallway. Except she wasn't dressed in modern clothes. Her hair was tied up in a bun. Her outfit, a servant's uniform from another century. He'd follow her into a room only for her to vanish into thin air. So what was Tony really seeing? Could the entity take on forms it chose? A child to lower the family's guard, a loved one to disarm them before revealing its true identity. The answer would become clearer in Tony's next encounter, and it wouldn't be innocent. At night, the Sallie House showed Tony its darkest face. Lying in bed, he would hear it first, scratching inside the walls. Not just 1 or 2 sounds, but like 6 or 7 people whispering all at once, voices crawling through the plaster. He could never make out the words, only the hiss of something trying to speak. One night, the whispers gave way to something much worse. At the foot of his bed, by the window, Tony saw what looked like dust drifting in the moonlight. At first, just harmless particles swirling around, but then they began to thicken, darken, gathering into a mass that slowly shaped itself into the figure of a woman. An old woman, dressed in black. She floated across the room towards him. The drawers beside the bed slammed open and shut. His waterbed heaved violently beneath him like it was trying to throw him out. Tony tried to scream, but no noise came out. The woman stretched out her arm, her hand reaching for his throat. Her voice split the room. I'm gonna... Before she could finish, the figure broke apart. In its place, a giant black bird exploded into the air. The drawers stopped slamming and the bed went still. Tony gasped, finally finding his voice, screaming for Debra, but across the hall, she heard absolutely nothing. She slept soundly beside their baby, unaware of what had just happened. Come on, if you were lying in bed, the drawers around you are slamming open and shut, and a woman in black is floating straight for your throat, do you freeze? Or do you run? Or maybe jump straight out of the window? On its own, maybe you'd call this sleep paralysis, a bad dream. But when added to the footsteps, the laughter, the scratches, it was another piece of a nightmare Tony just couldn't escape. And it was far from over. Because the next visitor looked innocent. Well, at first anyway. Tony woke again one night to see the little girl, Sallie, standing beside his bed. She reached towards him, though asking for comfort. But when he pulled away, her mouth twisted into a snarl. A low growl rumbled from her throat. Before his eyes, the girl began to change. Her body hunched forward, dropping onto all fours. Her skin sagged, melting, crawling with worms. Her childlike face stretched into something rotten and monstrous. This wasn't Sallie. This wasn't a child's ghost. This was something wearing her face like a mask. Every time the sightings crew returned, the activity seemed to intensify. The noises, the visions, and especially the scratches. At first, the crew thought Tony might be hurting himself. They checked him constantly, even if he stepped into the bathroom just for a minute. But then, in front of their very eyes, the marks began to appear. Fresh welts rose on his stomach as the cameras rolled. Angry red scratches carved across his forehead. And then, one night, the letters. The initials MC gouged into his skin, right there on film. The investigators were absolutely stunned. A chilling coincidence? The house itself had been built by a man named Michael C. Finney. 9 solid minutes of footage showed a scratch forming slowly across Tony's torso, as if invisible claws were raking at him in real time. For the skeptics, it was harder and harder to write off. But the scratches weren't the worst of it. Tony said the house was changing, twisting him into something he didn't recognise. He began hearing voices, whispering horrific things, urging him to kill Debra, to get her out of the way. Sometimes when she passed him in the hall, he was overcome with violent urges, thoughts that vanished the second he stepped outside, but returned the second he was back inside the house. At night, he dreamed vividly of slitting her throat with a butcher's knife, and one morning, the nightmare became reality. Tony woke up, filled with rage. He walked into the kitchen, pulled a butcher's knife from the drawer, and saw their cat. And then he blacked out. Later that day, after visiting his parents, he came home to a scene he would never forget. The cat stabbed and pinned to the kitchen counter. Tony swore he had no memory of doing it, but he knew he must have. That guilt has haunted him ever since. The same way the violent thoughts about Debra have haunted him ever since. Whether it was the house feeding him, or his own mind breaking under the weight of the haunting, Tony had become someone he didn't know. Someone dangerous. He sought out psychiatric help, but doctors found nothing clinical, nothing to explain the sudden urges, the rage, or the blackouts. The only thing that stopped them was leaving the Sallie House. By this point, everyone watching their story on TV was asking the same thing. Why don't you just leave? And Tony and Debra had asked themselves that same question. But the answer wasn't so simple. For Tony, it was desperation. He wanted out. But for Debra, it was fascination. She admits now that she can't understand it, but back then she was just enthralled. She wasn't the one waking up with scratches or hearing voices. To her, it was exciting, but to Tony, it was pure torture. That difference nearly cost them everything. One afternoon, Tony was standing near the staircase when something invisible slammed into him. He was hurled into the banister, shattering several wooden rungs. It felt deliberate, as if something had tried to throw him over the edge. That was the moment Debra finally woke up to the danger. She realised that whatever was in their home wasn't a lonely child. It wasn't playful. It was violent, and it was deadly. Within 3 weeks, the Pickmans were gone. People later asked how they managed to stay in the Sallie house for so long. The truth was, the haunting never really stayed consistent. Weeks or months would pass in eerie silence, nothing happening at all. Then they would start to think maybe it was in their heads, maybe it had passed. But, without warning, the activity would roar back to life, each time darker, each time more violent. And then there was the basement. Tony avoided the basement like the plague. In the far corner was a patch of missing bricks, a black hole in the wall that seemed to breathe unease. He never felt drawn down there. In fact, he felt the opposite, an overwhelming urge to stay away. After the Pickmans left, another tenant moved in. But she wasn't a family starting out, or a couple chasing the American dream. She was solitary, secretive, and before long, the landlord was called. When he arrived, he found the house trashed, and in the basement, he found something else. Strange markings on the walls, names scrawled in the darkness, and in the centre of the floor, a crudely painted pentagram. Whatever she had been doing down there, it certainly wasn't housekeeping. The Pickmans may have left 508 North 2nd Street, but the house wasn't done telling its story. Over the years, it's become one of the most investigated haunted locations in all of America. Paranormal researchers, TV shows, even skeptics, all drawn to the little white house in Atchison, Kansas. Ghost Adventures brought Tony and Debra back years after they'd fled. For Tony, the return was absolutely brutal. He admitted that after hearing so many EVPs captured in the house, the voices of what sounded like children, he began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, it wasn't demonic after all. Maybe it really was lost children. But his guilt-ridden hope didn't protect him. During filming, Tony was attacked again. Scratches appeared across his neck. Other investigators reported welts, burns, or even violent tugs on their clothes. And here's the strange thing. No matter how terrifying the experience is inside, almost everyone who visits the Sallie House says the same thing. They always want to come back. It's like the house plants a seed in your mind, a whisper at the back of your thoughts that says, you are not finished here. Over the decades, countless pieces of evidence have been recorded inside. Photos with distortions, videos with flickering lights, EVPs that sound like children giggling, crying, or even screaming. But one recording stands out above the rest. In 2018, the podcast Astonishing Legends, who usually focus on research, not ghost hunting, decided to test the Sallie House for themselves. They left a Panasonic RR-DR60 recorder in the nursery. It was voice-activated, completely silent until it heard a sound. The team stepped out, left the recorder running, then came back minutes later. What they captured has been described as one of the most chilling EVPs ever recorded.
Okay, file 10, I'm putting this down, I'm going to leave this here for about 5 minutes. If there's anything you want to say, any message you would like to share with the world, leave it on this recorder, and we will share it. Leaving now, closing the door. No one else is in this room this time. Coming back into the room, I'm going to take the recorder. Thank you for your time. Wishing you peace.
I'm not entirely sure what to make of it myself. I'm not sure if it sounds demonic or if it's just some kind of static disturbance. It's certainly unnerving, whatever it is. But I am by no means a tech wizard. I have absolutely no idea how this kind of thing works. So if you're listening and you can offer an insight, please let us know in the comments. And that brings this episode to an end. I thoroughly hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the Sallie House haunting. For more spooky content, click on this video right here. Until next time, I'm your host, Severed Soul.